So, the United States is about to hit its 250th anniversary. It's a huge milestone, right? But what are we actually celebrating? Well, author Mike Green has this really powerful idea. We should think about America's story less like something in a textbook and more like a direct inheritance. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so this quote really gets to the heart of it all. History is not past, it is passed down. Think about that. It means every single one of us is born into a story that's already being told. The laws are already on the books, the city's already built. We don't get to write the first chapter of the society we're born into, but we absolutely decide what the next chapter is going to look like.
And this is where things get complicated, right? Because for some people, America is this incredible miracle of liberty. But for others, it's a story rooted in a long, painful memory of captivity. And here's the thing, both of these are true. They exist at the same time. The American story holds both the soaring ideals and the brutal reality. And if we really want to understand where we are today, we've got to be willing to look at both sides of that coin. So let's be really clear about the goal here. This isn't about pointing fingers or making anyone feel ashamed. It's about looking honestly at the inheritance we all share, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Because only when we understand what we've been given can we make a conscious choice about what we're going to pass on. All right, so let's dive in. We're going to start at the beginning. Where did this massive contradiction at the heart of America even come from? Now, according to the source material for this explainer, there has been one question that has just echoed through American history from the very beginning. And that question is, what will you do with Black people? How each generation has answered that question, well, that has shaped literally everything. Our laws, our economy, our whole sense of who we are as a nation. So, how did this system of subjugating entire groups of people even get justified in the first place? That leads us to the very first major answer to that big question. Okay, check this out. We're going all the way back to 1493. It's called the Doctrine of Discovery. And this wasn't just some political policy. This was the decree from the Pope himself. It basically said that any land not inhabited by Christians was fair game. It could be claimed, conquered, exploited. It was like getting a divine green light for conquest, splitting the world into the conquerors and the conquered. And this is the really wild part. This doctrine completely flipped the script. Suddenly, violence wasn't just violence anymore. It was a virtue. Conquest wasn't just about taking land. It became a holy mission. This laid the spiritual and legal groundwork for a racial hierarchy that allowed Europeans to see their domination not as an act of oppression, but as their God-given destiny. Okay, let's jump forward a few hundred years to the founding of the United States. You have the architects of American liberty crafting these incredible documents about freedom. But how did they answer that same lingering question? And there it is again. What will you do with Black people? As the founders are writing these words that would inspire the world, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they were, at the very same time, making a choice about where Black people fit into that vision, or if they fit at all. This table just lays the contradiction out so clearly. You have the ideal, all men are created equal. But then, in the Constitution, you get the 3/5 clause, which basically says an enslaved person only counts as 3/5 of a human for political power. You have life, liberty, but then the fugitive slave clause, which meant that even if you escaped to a free state, you weren't free. The entire country had to help return you to bondage. The Constitution literally never says the word slavery, but it was built from the ground up to protect it. And if you want to see where all this thinking eventually leads, look no further than the Dred Scott decision in 1857. This wasn't some minor ruling. This was the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, saying, and I'm quoting here, that Black people had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. They made it official. Whether you were enslaved or free, you could never be a citizen. It was racial hierarchy stamped with the seal of the U.S. Constitution. But listen, that is not the whole story, because freedom was never just something to be given. It was something that had to be taken. And the story of Ona Judge proves it. She was enslaved by George and Martha Washington, and one night in Philadelphia, while the president and his wife were eating dinner, she just walked out the door. And she never came back. George Washington, the most powerful man in the new nation, used the very law he signed, the Fugitive Slave Act, to hunt her for the rest of his life. And he never, ever caught her. She took her freedom for herself. Now, a contradiction like that, a nation built on both liberty and slavery, it just couldn't hold. Something had to break. And it did. The country was torn apart, leading to a bloody civil war and a brand new, radical answer to that central question.
So here we are again. By the 1860s, this question wasn't some abstract debate anymore. It was a matter of life and death for the country itself. The Civil War forced the issue. It was no longer just about preserving the Union. The fight was fundamentally about whether the United States would be a nation defined by slavery or a nation that finally lived up to its ideals.
And here is a fact that is so important and so often gets glossed over. The Union did not win this war alone, not even close. More than 200,000 black men enlisted to fight for the Union. And Abraham Lincoln himself said it. Without their help, the war could not have been won. Think about that. They weren't just fighting for their own freedom, they were fighting to save the United States itself.
And what happened after the war? Wow. It was so revolutionary that historians call it America's second founding. You get these three incredible amendments. The 13th ends slavery, the 14th grants citizenship and equal protection, and the 15th protects the right to vote. For the very first time, the Constitution was rewritten to include Black Americans as full citizens. And for this brief, incredible moment in history, a real multiracial democracy started to take root.
But that beautiful vision was met with an absolutely brutal backlash. Organized terror campaigns led by groups like the Ku Klux Klan used violence, assassination, and intimidation to literally overthrow those new governments. And with the terror started, the law finished. The Supreme Court eventually came in with its infamous separate but equal ruling, which gave the green light to 100 years of Jim Crow segregation.
But even that couldn't kill the promise of equality. The fight just went into a new phase. And that brings us to what our source material calls America's third and maybe its most important revolution.
This is such a powerful way to look at it. You have three revolutions. The first one, in 1776, declared independence but kept slavery. The second, the Civil War, abolished slavery, but in the end, the nation abandoned the push for true democracy. So the third revolution, what we call the Civil Rights Movement, was about something bigger. It was a revolution to finally redeem the promise of equality itself, for everyone. And it's really important to know that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself called it the Negro Revolution. For him, this wasn't just a protest for people to be nicer to each other. No, it was a full-on moral war against the entire system of segregation, the laws, the economy, the social customs, everything that held it in place. And when you look at the core demands, you see what he meant. This was about way more than just sitting at a lunch counter. The movement was targeting the very architecture of American inequality. They demanded an end to discrimination in schools, in housing, and in banking. These weren't small tweaks. They were demanding a fundamental rebuild of American society. And that brings us right up to today, because more than half a century later, those demands, they still haven't been met. You still see huge racial gaps in schools, in housing, in banking. So the argument here is that the revolution wasn't lost, it was interrupted, and its goals are still the unfinished business of our time. So we end up right back where we started, thinking about our inheritance. That quote, "History is not past, it is passed down." The story of America's first 250 years is already written. We can't change it. So the question isn't just, who were we? The real question, the one this all leads to, is for us. It's for you. Who will we become now that we know?